you have owners managing the property. And so all three of these things, security of life, or just general security, property rights, and contract enforcement contribute as structural determinants of something that economists, macroeconomists and microeconomists, both in this country worry about regularly, which is why is it that the savings rate is so far below the rest of South Asia, or at least countries that we aspire to look like. So if you look at China, India, and Bangladesh, in particular, India and Bangladesh are interesting examples because until about 1990, both of them were saving about the same amount as we are. And yet, in the last 30 years, we've had very drastically different levels of outcomes. My argument is that in part, this is because of poor security of life, property, and contract. There are other determinants of those rates also, but poor enforcement in the court system is a big contributor to this. And so these three aspects of or underlying features of how a market runs guarantee, or not guarantee, but contribute to a crucial requirement or a crucial feature of how markets work, which is contestability. Contestability is that if I'm running a firm poorly, a competitor firm should be able to set up shop and take my business away. And what this does is it disciplines me in order to run a more efficient firm also. Without contestability, a market system has no efficiency value as such. We also talk within the market system about productive versus allocative efficiency. But there are places where the arguments of the market system perhaps don't apply very well. And so we'll talk about non-market institutions in a second. But before we do, part of property rights is protection from arbitrary taxation. This is Madison again. A just security to property is not afforded by that government under which unequal taxes oppress one species of property and reward another species, where arbitrary taxes invade the domestic sanctuaries of the rich and excessive taxes grind the faces of the poor. So we want to protect against arbitrary taxation. And if you read the law that was just passed 2 days ago by the federal government, yesterday actually, by the federal government in support of the Recording project, you'll find that that is in many ways supportive of arbitrary taxation, which is why it's incredibly detrimental to the investment climate of the country, no matter what the preamble says. I'll talk quickly about fixing non-market institutions. The first is the tax to GDP ratio is poor. Ram Saab is sitting here, we can debate what the tax to GDP ratio should be. But I think we all can agree that the taxes are improperly applied across sectors. For economic efficiency to work well, we need to have people making wise decisions or decisions in service of efficiency on the margin, which means that when I'm trying to decide whether to make my farm a housing society, the same amount of taxes should be applied to both sectors in order for me to make that decision on efficiency grounds, assuming other externalities and so on away. So the blue, the graph on the left is contribution to GDP by economic sector. Graph on the right is contribution to taxes by sector. Agriculture contributes basically nothing. Services contribute much less than what they should be contributing. And industry, of course, contributes the most. And even within industry, different sectors and different firms will contribute different amounts, which means that your economic decisions in this country are not being made with productivity at the forefront, but productivity plus taxation, which is again one major reason why we have a productivity crisis. The China model, we often hear the China model since CPEC started, and no one really has articulated what the China model is. China is one of the world's most devolved countries. and it has devolved more so in the last 2 or 3 decades. I've been told to wrap up, so I'll be quick. But if you look at how much taxes are raised by municipalities, the equivalent of our tehsils or lower, it is often, throughout China's history, it is about 40 to 70% of all revenue generated. In Pakistan, receipts raised and expended in provinces is as low as 15% or 16%, and at the tehsil level, practically nothing. So we haven't devolved taxation and expenditures. I'll skip this in the interest of time. And so what this does, and again, all of this is in the report, but what this does is when you're not taxing at the lower level and not expending at the lower level, decisions about how to run the economy are not being made on the ground, but in Islamabad or Lahore or Karachi, Kuwait or Peshawar, which means that not only is the manager or the decision maker too far removed from the ground reality, but also there is a lack of healthy competition. So in China, again, the different municipalities are fighting over whether the next plant will be set up there or not. And so what this does is it creates healthy competition on service delivery in China. Another thing that China does is they create competition among state-owned enterprises. So imagine if there was actual healthy competition on who will construct the next road between LDA, NLC, FW, or whoever else. What China has done is it has managed the size of different producers of public goods such that they are of equal size, roughly equal capability, so that you actually get healthy competition going. And if one firm is, let's say FWO was growing faster than the rest, on a level playing field, you would reward the managers of that enterprise by promoting them up in the bureaucracy. None of which obviously happens here. I'll skip India, but just suffice to say that they're reaping the benefits of 60 years of, in Nehru's time, starting to emphasize their universities. Pakistan's universities are nowhere near theirs in terms of rankings. And as a result, even Pakistani Americans are earning much less than Indian Americans today. More evidence about how bad we're doing on education. And what every other country that we've talked about has done is that they increase the export to GDP ratio. And so I'll quote Narasimha Rao in ending. My objective is to make India truly self-reliant. Self-reliance is not a mere slogan for me. It means, this is important, it means the ability to pay for our imports through our exports. Self-reliance is not that we produce cars and phones and everything else within our borders. It means we can pay for the stuff that we import. My motto is trade, not aid. Aid is a crutch. Trade builds pride, and India has been trading for thousands of years. We believe that a bulk of government regulation and controls are stifling the creativity and innovativeness of our people. Excessive controls have absorbed or created corruption. We believe that the nation, as well as the government, must learn to live within its means. This is the Prime Minister of India who survived a vote of no confidence. Yeah, we say we have to build a charter of economy and we need political leadership. This is a very, very weak Prime Minister of India deciding that he will just undertake economic reforms. And here's hoping. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Hasanain, for that presentation and detailed research. Now, the next speaker we have coming to speak to you. I'll start with the story. In the times of Margaret Thatcher, Friedrich who helped start the Institute of Economic Affairs, and one very critical component of that institute was this man named Anthony Fisher, who was using a mix of charm, communication skills, and fundraising to develop institutions that eventually fueled the intellectual economic policy direction that both the United States and the US states. So now, Rizwan Rawji is the Anthony Fisher of Pakistan. He runs around the entire world, raising support for economic reform in Pakistan.
जी सर
And,
सर एक चीज कंफर्म करने
he's,
रिजवान रावजी की
based in
पहले वीडियो
Belgium,
प्ले
and
करनी है
that's
पहले
why he's
प्रेजेंटेशन
based in
पहले
And,
वीडियो वो बता देंगे
he will
ऑन करके रख लें
he's been
इसको बंद
a
कर
supporter of crime, a big foundation stone in many ways, especially since the last 7 or 8 years, helping crime open doors, get people connected. In fact, last year, if I'm not wrong, he was instrumental in bringing Dr. Arthur Laffer to Pakistan, and that was a significant moment in at least the lives of researchers in Islamabad, because for the first time they got to speak to somebody who was really involved in policy making at the time of Reagan. He was an advisor to Reagan and also known as the father of flat taxes. Dr. Kramal Haq, of course, is very well versed with Dr. Arthur Laffer's work and also his personality. So without further ado, Rizwan Rawji on the supply side tax reforms for Pakistan.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Assalamu alaikum. Can you guys all hear me? Okay? All right? All right. I want to say one thing. I was not born in Pakistan. I was born in the middle of nowhere, in the jungles of the Congo. I lived very few of my life in Pakistan in my early days. So most of my life I've lived abroad in 4 different continents. And a lot of people in and out of Pakistan, they ask me this question: what the hell? Why do you care about Pakistan? Why do you care about this country? Well, the answer is very simply 3 things. First, we have not fulfilled Qaid-e-Azam's vision. It has to be fulfilled. Period. Second, our graveyard, the family graveyard, is in Pakistan. And the third reason, the Pakistan cricket team. All right, my title of my speech today is Supply Side Tax Reforms for Sustained Economic Growth. There are 6 pillars of supply-side economic policies. As my mentor and good friend, Dr. Arthur Laffer, pointed out in his keynote speech 1 year ago at the first Prime Prosperity Forum. They are, now please listen, the 6 pillars, that's for me, these are the primordial part of supply-side economics. Number 1. A low rate, broad-based tax system. A low rate, broad-based tax system. Number 2, free trade. Number 3, sound money. Number 4, spending restraint. Number 5, deregulation. Number 6, privatization. All 6 are essential to achieve prosperity. However, due to time restraints, I will only focus on 2 of the 6 pillars. The first being low rate, broad-based tax system, and the second, free trade. A low rate, broad-based tax system needs A to Z rationalization. And that is basically on the direct and indirect taxation. And the subcomponents of these are the income taxes and the corporate tax. The second part is the indirect taxes. Now that is subdivision into the sales tax on goods and services, custom duty, and excise duty. It is evident that direct and indirect taxes both have the narrowest tax base and the highest tax rate. Now, please, ladies and gentlemen, when I talk about taxes, there's a very particular difference between taxes and tax rates. That is the key component of supply side economics. When you talk about taxes, that's one side of the equation, the other is the tax rate. For me, it's the tax rate that is the most important essential part of the equation. Included in these high tax rates, we have withholding provisions, multiple tax brackets, subsidies, exemptions, amnesties, perks, etc., etc. Furthermore, tax codes are complex and confusing. It's no wonder why tax revenues to GDP remains constant at around 9.5%, 10% over the last so many years. If Pakistan wants to get out of this dilemma, it must embrace supply side economics and economic policies. In short, Pakistan needs to embrace the Laffer curve. Yeah.
So you asked me, what is the Laffer curve? Now, in all honesty, the Laffer curve, as you may see, is my profile, but no, it's not. The Laffer curve is the relationship between tax rates and total tax revenues. And by the way, I did not name it the Laffer curve, and it's been around for centuries and centuries. In fact, the first reference to it I really know is in Medina in 1381. Ibn Khaldun described it this way. At the beginning of dynasties, tax rates are low and revenues are high. At the end of dynasties, tax rates are high and revenues are low. That's the sort of logic behind it. But let me, if I can, say, how much would you work if you were taxed at 100%? So that every time you go to the office, instead of getting a check, you get a bill. Obviously, you wouldn't work at all, and there'd be no work, but also the tax revenues would be zero. Now, that's this point right here on the Laffer curve. At 100% tax rates, no one will find there's any incentive whatsoever to work. They won't work, and tax revenues will be zero as well. Now, as you start lowering tax rates to 99, to 98, to 97, somewhere along the line, all of a sudden, you're going to find it worthwhile to start working, and you're going to see revenues starting to rise. The other point of the Laffer curve that's fixed is at zero tax rates. At zero tax rates, if there are no taxes, of course, the government's not going to collect any revenues. We're going to have a lot of output, employment, production, but there'll be no revenues. And that's this point down here. And again, at this point, if they start raising tax rates, as they start raising tax rates, what you're going to find is the revenues are going to increase, but they're going to increase at slower and slower rates. And these two curves will come at a point, a maximum point out here. Now, the key thing about the Laffer curve that makes it fairly interesting for politicians is to remember it's a pedagogic device, not an explicit measure of any one country. But what it does show you is that there are two tax rates that give the same amount of revenue. There's a high tax rate and a low tax rate. No country should ever want to be in that high tax rate range. I mean, why would you ever want a tax at this point where if you lower tax rates, you collected more money and you have more output, employment, and production? So this is the Laffer curve, which really brings together the debate about taxes. There are two effects taxes have on revenues. Number one, which we call the arithmetic effect. If you raise tax rates, you do collect more revenue per dollar of tax base. That's the arithmetic effect. But there's also the economic effect, which if you increase tax rates, you reduce the attractiveness of doing the activity and you will shrink the tax base. These two effects, the arithmetic effect and the economic effect, always work in the opposite direction. In this range, the arithmetic effect wins, and you get more revenues by raising tax rates. In this range, the economic effect wins, which by raising tax rates, you actually get less revenues because you do more and more damage to the tax base. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is the Laffer curve? Thank you.
So economics, as Dr. Laffer mentioned, is all about incentives. Incentives on work and investment for enhanced productivity and capital investment. There is no doubt in my mind that given the current tax rates and its narrow tax base, Pakistan is on the prohibitive range of the Laffer curve. A low rate on a broad-based tax is the solution. Tax incentives also have a tremendous positive effect on economic growth. Pakistan's GDP growth has consistently underperformed, and real GDP per capita has trended downwards compared to its most significant neighbors. Pakistan's high population growth rate with a low GDP growth rate further exacerbates the situation. Tax incentives also have a positive effect on government tax revenues. By far, the biggest challenge for Pakistan is how to increase its tax to GDP ratio. The World Bank, in its 2019 report, the $400 million report called Pakistan Raises Revenue, clearly states, and I quote, Pakistan has substantial potential to increase tax receipts without imposing new taxes or raising tax rates, which recommends a broad-based low tax rate approach. Targeting a tax to GDP ratio of 9.5% to 17% over the next 5 years. Now, this is not me talking. I'm talking about the World Bank report, which is available on the website, and you can all read it, okay? To broaden the tax base on individuals, the prime focus should be on the high income earners, which I call the 1%. High income earners are the most sensitive to incentives. They have the means to shelter their income in many ways, such as avoidance, evasion, or simply by not working. The tax base of the high income earners is extremely low, and there's a huge potential for increasing the revenues. If taxation is about fairness, then all attempts should be made to generate as much of tax revenues from the high income earners. Lowering the highest marginal tax rate, which today I believe it's 35%, for income greater than 12 million Pakistani rupees. Is that correct, Dr. Ikram? There's to reduce the rate of 35 to near the level of the median tax rate, there's a high probability that we will see the Laffer curve effect, as Dr. Laffer said. When you come down the Laffer curve, you get more incentivized, and therefore your tax earnings are also on the increase. Whenever the top income tax rates are high, the high earners pay a lesser share of their true income. When top income tax rates are low, the high earners pay a greater share of their true income. According to Pakistan's tax experts, and one of them is sitting right here in this room, Dr. Ikram, can you please stand up? And I'm talking about tax experts. In their study, now I don't know if any of you have ever read this thing that was published by Prime. I think we did it in 2019. Okay. I highly suggest that if you're not a reader of economics, at least try to read the first chapter. And this was done by Dr. Ikram and his lovely wife, Huzaima Bukhari. It's a comprehensive tax study on supply side for Pakistan. And it's right there, available, free of cost. According to Huzaima Bukhari and Dr. Ikram Mulhaq in their study, which I just mentioned to you right now, a flat rate tax at 10% with no deductions on all individual taxpayers will increase the tax base from the current around 3 million to up to 8 million individuals. In return, tax revenues from the current 4 trillion, I believe, rupees can go as high as up to 8 trillion. And actually, I was discussing with Dr. Ikram this morning over breakfast. He says, no, Rizwan, it's going to be 12 trillion rupees. So I said, hey, Dr. Ikram, let's be on the conservative side and keep it to that 8 trillion figure. And this is over a period of 5 years because it takes time for the economy to get incentivized and therefore increase in the tax revenues. So in all, it's a win-win situation. To broaden the tax base on corporations, the prime focus should be on the large corporations. Large corporations have the means to minimize the tax. They can hide their best, they can hire the best tax advisors, tax lawyers, and many other ways to avoid their tax obligations. The current tax rate on corporations, which is 29%, and I believe recently we added a 10% super tax, which I think we call it the Mifta tax. Is that the Mifta tax? Is not only higher compared to Pakistan's immediate neighbors, but is also within the rest of Asia. Corporations have make decisions on capital investments based on their after-tax income. Maximizing after-tax income allows them to grow and create millions of jobs. And again, thanks to our 2 tax experts, they suggest that a flat rate of tax at 20% on all corporates is the solution. This will incentivize domestic and foreign entities to invest in Pakistan. As companies grow, and honestly speaking, there are virtually no national champions in Pakistan. Okay, even if they are, they're actually right now receding. It's a win-win situation. Pakistan has very few national champions, like I said. It is also evident that indirect tax rates on sales on goods and services, which is at 17%, is also much higher compared to not only our immediate neighbors, but according to the rest of Asia. Besides the high tax rate, there once again is an additional tax burden due to high inflation on the general public especially towards the low income class. Sales tax also has a very narrow base. In total, more than 89% is paid by less than 400 entities. In reality, the effective sales tax rate for domestic sales on goods and services is 4.5%. The main reasons behind this is due to high cost of compliance, multiplicity of sales tax rates, and being confusing and complex. This increases the opportunities for avoidance, evasion, and corruption. It also increases the cost to government of administrating the system. Again, according to our tax expert, they advise a single-digit sales tax rate of 5% on all goods and services. This case for simplicity will have enormous benefits for the taxpayers and the tax collectors. Again, a win-win situation. Custom duty also has a very narrow tax base. There are only 10 top commodities that contribute to the bulk of the custom duty. Duty slabs from 3% to 20% with a large number of tariff lines, full of SRO-ridden system, under-invoicing, and the culture of corruption. Tariff policy is not employed as a revenue instrument, rather than a trade policy instrument. Furthermore, the vast amount of revenue collection by the government is at the import stage, around 55%, I believe, in the form of withholding provisions. No wonder this starves the businesses in their working capital. Policymakers fail to understand that you need to import in order to export, and that the trade deficit is also a capital surplus. Free trade for Pakistan, like the rest of Asia, would by itself add enormously to the country's prosperity. Government revenues from custom duty at 13% in the overall share of the revenues is very pale compared to the rest of the tax revenues. Again, Bukhari and Dr. Haq suggest a single rate of custom duty at 5%, and this being revenue neutral for the exchequer. Again, a win-win situation. In summary, a low rate flat tax on the broadest base, 10% on individuals, 20% on corporations, 5% on sales and goods and services, and 5% on custom duty. The supply side tax policies with a low rate broad-based tax rate will shift the tax structure. Can you show that?
Sir, आपके पास वो है उसे.
The transformation. No, not that one. Yeah, that. Will shift the tax structure transformation vision from indirect taxes to direct taxes. Currently, indirect tax represents more than 60% of government tax revenues, and direct tax about 40%. The policy recommended will target the distribution so that direct tax will represent more than 70% of government revenues and indirect tax at 30% of government revenues. A broad tax base removes as many ways as possible for people to hide their income and avoid paying taxes. With enough love for one's country and an abundance of political will, such a tax reform is relatively easy to achieve. But the relatively effortless implementation should not fool you. It will have massive beneficial consequences and would start yielding results almost immediately. Budget deficit, which I call the big elephant in the room. Ever increasing budget deficits due to insufficient tax collection and excessive government spending has consistently led to massive government borrowing in order to fill the fiscal gap. Debt addiction is like heroin addiction. Easy to start, but hard to quit. Debt obligations now at almost 40% of government budget is killing Pakistan. It must stop, and it must stop now. We do not realize that the role of government is not to distribute its annual revenues towards its creditors, but rather towards development in infrastructure, health, and education. With global interest rates rising and rupee devaluation, it is making it harder and harder, if not impossible, for Pakistan to service its external and internal debts and liabilities. Debt servicing by further borrowing is like borrowing from Peter to pay Paul. It has a domino effect on all aspects of macroeconomics and is the root cause of the general malaise. Year-on-year budget deficits have direct impact on the current account deficits as well, and the balance of payments. Government spending, which I call taxation, and borrowing starves the private sector of shared valuable resources. Unless and until we put in place a set of supply-side economic policies, the crisis of balance of payments will remain. Free markets activate a country's economic immune system, which is so desperately needed to get out of this crisis. The government of Pakistan should be in the business of undoing things and not doing things. Government has become the problem, not the solution. We need to get out of this quagmire. And last but not the least element of my speech is called the trust deficit. Trust is essential in conducting good business, and government should do the same in the political economy. Lack of trust between all stakeholders leads to political and economic paralysis. Politics and economics are two sides of the same coin. Good politics equals good economics and vice versa. Lack of political will is a constant frustration for economists and economic policy advocates. We may give policy advice, but it is up to the political class to implement these policies. As the saying goes, we can take the horse to the water, but cannot force it to drink. Even worse is the outright dismissal by the naysayers. And to them I say, how can you reflect on the quality of a cricket team if you don't let them on the playing field? So let's put a stop to government's whack-a-mole ill-advised solutions. Let's not be myopic and let common sense prevail over dumb ideas. We constantly talk about stabilizing the economy. I don't know if you guys keep hearing, I keep hearing it all the time. Stabilizing, stabilizing. After every crisis, stabilizing for me is getting the patient out of ICU and into the recovery room. Not good enough. What we need is for the patient to get out of the hospital and getting back to work. Economic prosperity can only be achieved through sustained economic growth. So let's embrace supply side economics. Let's embrace the Laffer curve. There is too much negativity around. And for me, the glass is always half full and never half empty. The future of our young generation is at stake. And therefore, it is our duty to do what is right, and time is short. Pakistan could be where it should be, if only. The best is yet to come. Pakistan, Zindabad, Pakistan, Pahindabad.
Thank you so much, Rizwan. So, back in I think 2013 or 2014, Ali, Salman, and I met over Facebook, right? And I was an aspiring journalist living the exciting life, working for television and being where everybody needs to, wherever everybody would want to be, I was there. And then somehow Ali and I connected over ideas, and we met. And at that time, I was working for the state broadcaster and quite exposed to the weaknesses of how the bureaucracy works and how state institutions work. And we were on the same page. In fact, I would say that we're almost as if brothers in our cause, and Ali is my spirit animal. So he was kind enough to offer me a position at Prime, and I joined in 2016, and we worked together. I think we had some of the best times working on new and exciting things, including this tax reform idea, which was led by Dr. Ikram and Rizwan Rawji. I still remember the slogan. It was Ek Awam, Ek Tax, Pay Tax, One Nation, One Tax, Pay Tax. And I'm really glad to see that we are still talking about it. And I think the reason we're talking about it is because Ali Salman is a man of great focus and a man of great patience and courage. And that is something that is required. Ali Salman founded Prime back in 2013, if I'm not wrong, with some support from the Friedrich Naumann Foundation, within the premises of the Friedrich Naumann Foundation. And it has been a struggle. But we've seen the institution grow in more ways than one. And Ali went on to go to Malaysia, head with the think tank Ideas as their executive director, and is also the founder of the Islamic Liberty Network. And he continues to do his work. He's committed to the principles that he's upheld in those years. And I only left Prime to start my own thing, the technology application unit. And I had the coincidence, the chance to actually have Mr. Tuaha Adil sitting right towards your right side as a fellow at our institution. And he was a wonderful, bright fellow, amazing input from him, from his side. Now I'd like to ask both Ali Salman and Tuaha to take the stage. Their next presentation is about reforming state market nexus in Pakistan's sugar sector. This is based around the newest report that Prime has worked on. It's an analysis of the recommendations and roadmap of the sugar sector. Thank you.
Assalamu alaikum. Good afternoon. Prime has recently published a report reforming state market nexus in Pakistan's sugar sector. So before I start the presentation, Farhan, can you play the video?
पाकिस्तान में माशी तरक्की का दारोमदार जरी सनती और तिजारती शोबों के बाहमी इश्तराक से मुमकिन है जिसके लिए हुकूमती पॉलिसियां बुनियादी फ्रेमवर्क मुहैया करती है।
Okay, time is short, so I will jump to the presentation. Full screen. Okay, so the motivation behind this report was after every 2-3 years, we see some kind of distortion in the sugar market. It can be in the form of price fluctuations, shortage, news about artificial hoarding, and at the same time, we see farmers are complaining about low and delayed payments. Mills are complaining about that they are going to default, and government finances are under pressure. So everyone is complaining, and that's why we did a comprehensive study in this sector to highlight the flaws, problems, and to come up with the policy solutions. In this presentation, we will have a look at some trends in the sugar sector, problems in the sugar sector, current scenario, and then the recommendations. The importance of sugar sector can be assessed from the fact that contribution of sugarcane in important crops is around 13%. Contribution of sugar in manufacturing sector is around 6%. Consumption of sugar by household is only 20%, and rest 80% is by the industry. Sugar sector provides direct employment to 1.1 million people, and it has a market share of 500 billion rupees. Annual per capita consumption of sugar in Pakistan is around 25 kgs. If we look at some trends, crop cultivation area in Pakistan has increased by 3.5%. From 22.7 million hectares in 2011 to 23.5 million hectares in 2021. Similarly, sugarcane cultivation area increased by 20% from 1 million hectares to 1.2 million hectares. And if we look at sugarcane cultivation area as a percentage of total crop area, it increased from 4.3% in 2011 to 5% in 2021. And sugarcane yield in Pakistan increased by 25% from 56 tons per hectare to 70 tons per hectare in 2021. Sugarcane yield in India increased by 3% from 70 tons per hectare to 72 tons per hectare. And sugarcane yield in China increased by 23% from 66 tons per hectare to 81 tons per hectare. So this information shows that we are lagging behind our neighboring partners, and there is a significant room for improvement. If we look at the performance of sugar mills, utilization of mills have declined from 80% in 2011 to 76% in 2021. And sucrose recovery hovers around 9.5 to 10% in Pakistan, whereas sucrose recovery in India is around 11.5% and in China is around 13%. If we look at the overall performance of sugar sector, sugar production increased by 36% in last 10 years, whereas sugar consumption has increased by 42%. And sugar production usually remained higher than consumption, but it dropped in 2018 and then it converged back to the consumption in 2021. If we compare the domestic and international price, then historically domestic price of sugar has remained higher than the international price. But only in 2012 and 2013, international price was higher. And if we look at the price differential, price difference in 2011 was $69 per ton, and in 2021 it was around $100 per ton. Now, there are several problems due to which sugar sector is not performing up to the potential. First is the support price mechanism. So government has adopted support price to support farmers, to protect farmers, but in reality, farmers are still suffering. They are not getting due payments. And the problem with support price is that it does not discriminate between efficient farmers and inefficient farmers. For inefficient farmers, they don't have any incentive to innovate, to improve. And for efficient farmers, it is kind of discouraging. Next problem is payments to farmers. So Sugar Factories Control Ordinance 2020 directs millers to clear payments in 15 days, but farmers experience delays in payments, and especially in case of quality premium. Next problem is establishment of sugar mills. So law restricts the establishment and expansion of mills, which creates barriers to entry and exit, and it prevents the closure of inefficient mills. Also, it prevents the mills from upgrading their infrastructure. Next problem is price determination of sugar. So government decides the price of sugar across the country without taking into account the cost of production of sugar in different provinces. So it benefits some mills and it hurts some mills. And mills in Sindh pay quality premium, but not in other provinces. Next problem is export restriction. So the problem with export restriction is that it prevents the mills from focusing outside Pakistan to cater international demand, and it keeps them restricted to domestic consumption. And at the time of surplus, it results into shortage in coming seasons and delayed payments to the farmers. Next problem is price comparison. So domestic price of sugar has historically remained higher than the international price, and which shows one thing, that our farming techniques are outdated and we need to innovate our farming sector. Next problem is import restrictions. So import of raw and refined sugar is restricted by high tariffs in Pakistan, which removes incentives for the farmers to innovate and for the mills to improve their efficiency. Next problem is utilization of sugarcane development cess. So government collects money from farmers and mills to carry out research and development and to upgrade infrastructure. But the problem is those funds remain unutilized, and research in this sector is lagging. The last but most important point is water pricing. Pakistan has no water pricing mechanism, and sugarcane is a water rich crop. It requires a lot of water, and there is no mechanism to price water and to conserve water in Pakistan, and that's why we are using more water for low return, with crop with low economic returns. Now, if we look at the current situation, PSMA, according to PSMA, Pakistan has right now 1.3 million tons of surplus sugar, and they have asked the government to allow them to export sugar. But government is reluctant to allow the export because of fear of price hike and damages to the crop from the recent floods. If we look at the situation from the floods, floods have affected around 300,000 hectares of sugarcane crop, which is around 30% of the total sugarcane cultivation area. But in reality, the damage to the crop is much lower, and in some parts, quality of crop has improved because of high rains, excessive rain. And in the next year, it is expected that we will have surplus production of sugar. This is the stock market position. I will not go into the details. Share of Sindh in sugarcane production is around 22%, and major damage from floods happened in the Sindh due to be 35 to 40% of crop in Sindh has damaged. But at the same time, crop has increased, quality of crop and acreage has increased in Punjab. And according to Punjab Crop Reporting Service, that it is expected that we will have 10 times more sugar production in the coming season. So the possibility of shortage in the next season is unlikely. Recently, government has raised the support price from 230 to around 300 per 40 kg. So with the increase in support price, around 27 rupees per kg will be the increase in the final price of the sugar, retail price. And usually around 5 kg of sugar is used in every household per month. So it will have an impact of around rupees 135 per month. But if government decides to keep the prices fixed at 90 or 100, then it will have negative consequences for the farmers and for the mills. Right now, Pakistan has surplus stock of sugar, and at the same time, international price of sugar is higher than the domestic price. So it creates an incentive for the country to export surplus sugar and earn foreign exchange. Recommendations.
Thank you so much, Tuaha, for doing excellent work in your analysis. You definitely hard work here, presented it well. I'll just skip over the last few messages. The presentation is there, the report is there, and I think the problems which we have highlighted are now well received. I'm not going to take more time here. और मैं सिर्फ दो, I think I just mention a couple of points. So first of all, I refer to what the Honorable Finance Minister was saying in the morning. It was about this dispute of the stock information, whether they should rely on the stock estimates by the industry or the government should have its own estimates, and there is ongoing tussle between the two stakeholders. Now, this is a classical problem of economics, and Hayek hopefully saw it a long time ago about the centrality of information, that there is no way a central planner of the government can understand the demand which is originating from millions of consumers, right? So while it is important for government to look after like food security, but I think it is even more important to look after the incentive, as the report mentions, incentive for the farmers, that kind of control about stocks with the restrictions on trade is a recipe for disaster, because it is highly unlikely that government इस तरह की information को maintain करे on time, उसको update करे, or the time it takes for the government bodies to actually make decisions can be disastrous from the policy point of view. And as we have seen it for last 6 months, ये ऐसा नहीं है कि ये अचानक से ये चीज develop हो गई है sugar का crisis. It's a different kind of crisis. पहले सालों में हमें import की crisis होते थे, इस साल हमें surplus का crisis है. Each time government has a foothold in it, it will, I think, continue. So in short, one of the pillars about this pillars of prosperity which Rizwan Rawji highlighted was free trade. So हम ये कह रहे हैं कि capacity में investment हो चुकी है, लेकिन underutilized है, cartelization भी मुमकिन है होती हो, उसके ऊपर Direct Competition Commission अपना एक फैसले भी दे चुके हैं और उनको हमें देखने की जरूरत है. लेकिन अगर trade open है, domestic trade or international trade, both ways, import, export, refined sugar and the raw sugar. So that is the automatic check on any such tendencies. बजाय कि हम ये देखें कि कौन कितनी corruption कर रहे हैं, हमें अपने incentives को, अपने rules को redefine करने की जरूरत है. And that is the whole idea of the reforms. And if you link up the broader discussion जो हम reform के हम कर रहे हैं, तो this is, I think, provides a very good example, case study of what needs to be done. So we have talked about very broad issues like tax and trade, but we are also showing one sector in which the government is involved, in which we have industry, we have farmers, we have consumers. And it's one of the sensitive sectors, not just in Pakistan, but all over the world. So it's not easy to change the way we are doing things. But I hope, and we hope, that the crisis is also an opportunity. So we are facing export like एक्सपोर्ट भी कम हो रही है, उसका रेट भी कम हो रहा है, और अगर आपको एक अपॉर्चुनिटी मिल रही है इस वक्त, तो हमें शायद बहुत पहले ये फैसला कर लेना चाहिए था इसको एक्सपोर्ट को अलाउ करने का। लेकिन साथ ही साथ हो सकता है फ्यूचर में ऐसा ना हो, प्रोडक्शन कैन वेरी, सो इम्पोर्ट एंड एक्सपोर्ट दोनों शुड बोथ शुड बी अलाउड। So that is where we are coming from on this report. You can read. So now I'll take this discussion forward. We have about half an hour. I'll switch my hat to the Prime Executive Director. We have half an hour, and we are not seeing our chief guest of this session, Mr. Tariq Bajwa. I think we're still at the Prime Minister's office, so he may join. But in the interest of time, what we can do is we can have a discussion with the with the participants. I'll request Rizwan Rawji to come back on the stage for a Q&A session, and hopefully then we will conclude on time for this. Thank you.
Assalamualaikum. This is Dr. Nadia Tahir. Since this morning, we've been having the sermons from all male counterparts. So I should take the lead as a woman to speak. My question to Ali Hasanain, that as a student of economic analysis and public policy, the first generation models emphasizes about the incremental capital output ratio, and the crux which differentiates the countries is the saving rate. The second generation models speak about human capital, and there comes the schooling and literacy and human development, all the debate into the focus. The third generation model speaks about institutions. Nowadays, it's more of talking about competitiveness and the capacity to sell and produce. Yes, we lag on all the three indicators: saving rates, literacy, or the quality of education. And in the last, we do not have institutions which promote growth, but we are no more or never been the part of these supply chains, and our capacity to produce goods and services has eroded severely. So when we see analysis, the type of the analysis which you have presented, and I'm not sure that you have yourself have reversed the order in your presentation. You started from the institutions and then all the other indicators. So how you see that the government can play a role in giving incentives which can enhance the capacity to produce and sell. It's reminding you that we failed miserably in planting the nursery of the entrepreneurs in late 60s and early 60s. So we still see that all industrial sector is relying on the government and see towards the government that they should facilitate them in form of subsidies or SROs, as Rizwan Rawji has put aptly, that what is the role of the government and why are entrepreneurs not becoming effectively the part of the international supply chains? Thank you. And Rizwan Rawji sahab, excellent presentation. We know Huzaima and Ikram and their excellent work. But in a country like Pakistan, where we have permanent jobs and motivation to work does not affect by the tax rate. Whatever the tax rate would be, it's the individuals, salaried class who pay mostly the taxes, and the corporates are hardly the part of the system. So this equation of tax rates and the taxes, multiplicity of the taxes, has not hampering or putting a damage on the motivation to work. So tax rate has no effect on the capacity to work and productivity and efficiency. How you see in the framework of the Laffer curve that this motivation to work or the capacity to work can be enhanced or not otherwise with this type of permanent job security in public sector organizations. How you see? Thank you.
Can I go first, please? I totally disagree with you, madam. Economics is all about incentives, okay? Whether you're black, whether you're brown, whether you are green, whether you are yellow, whether you're white, we as human beings all react to incentives and disincentives. Supply side economics is all about incentives. Okay, I'm not going to get into the details of this and that. Okay, human nature is such. If you incentivize people, they give more of it. If you disincentivize people, they give you less of it. And that is the basic reasoning behind supply side economics. And taxes have the highest consequences on disincentives, okay? And as Dr. Laughter mentioned, and he didn't spell out Ibn Khaldun very well, okay? Now, Ibn Khaldun was a 14th century scholar, and he was a Tunisian-born scholar that did his studies throughout the empire. And he clearly said in those days that when dynasties start growing, the tax rates are low and the tax revenues are high. And he did it by observation. And he saw that empires collapsed and empire ended with the idea that the assessments, in those days they used to call assessments, when the assessments were high, when the taxes were high, the revenues declined over a period, and that ended the dynasties. So it's like a constant circle, one dynasty ending after the other, purely based on incentives. And he understood, being a 14th century scholar, he understood basically by human nature, observing human nature. So, you know, you do this economic tricks and this and that, it's all fine. But at the end of the day, like Dr. Laffer says, if I tax you 100%, there is no incentive for you to come to work. If I stand there, I took everybody's paycheck and said, now this is my money, you go home and come back again tomorrow and work, I don't see anybody coming back, at least anybody safe. So taxes have a role in incentives and vice versa, and it is a very important factor in all economics, pure and simple. That's all.
Dr. Stana? Okay, so you were talking about institutions and how they would fit into a conversation about growth rates or growth models. For me, everything that you highlighted about growth models, from resource accumulation to human capital and then institutions, they're all part of the puzzle. And so I don't really see institutions as being the only solution or the one solution. The spirit of this report was as sort of a follow-on from the vision document, where many of the other factors that you're discussing have already been explicated by my colleagues last year. I was not involved in that, but the idea of this was to fill in one of the gaps that was present there, which is that the document didn't elaborate enough on what the underlying institutions for markets are, which is why we talk about this. Now, you said also, how do we create incentives for firms to produce and invest more? And my answer is that, my default answer is that we shouldn't give them incentives. Right? The reason is that in a market system, both production and investment decisions are by actors who are ultimately residual claimants, right? And so the standard answer. Now, that answer has been challenged by many authors. The most recent that I read was Mariana Mazzucato's sort of argument. Another woman economist, so not represented here, unfortunately. Women do about 20% or 15% of PhDs, so it's very hard sometimes to make panels with women being represented as well as men. But Mariana Mazzucato perhaps sort of made a very nice argument that changed how I think about markets and market failure. So when you look at the literature, it says, okay, here is an efficient market system, and here are the type of market failures that can happen. So which could be, for example, the creation of externalities of different types, public goods, lack of information. And so the traditional view of how to work with markets is to plug those gaps. Where there isn't market, you give market. Where there isn't information, you give information. If there's a negative externality, you create a tax, a Pigouvian tax. If there is a positive externality, you create a subsidy, and so on and so forth. Mazzucato says that is you chasing. So first of all, because an economy is dynamic, over time, different market failures will arise at different times and intensities. So if what you're doing is chasing after market failure all the time, you're never going to be able to get perfect markets. And so what you should focus on is not market fixing, but market creation, market building. That is really the realm of industrial policy. And I'll only venture a few thoughts on that because this is something I'm still learning more about. There are others within our group who've thought more deeply about this. But first, the question is, should you be picking winners? And my default, as I said, is no. But if you're going to pick winners, then those winners should be picked according to some strategy. Korea, for example, picked upstream industries to invest in through government policies, such as raw materials, steel and rubber and things like this, and allowed their downstream industries to face more competitive pressures. Right? South Korea did. We've done the reverse. We haven't invested in upstream industries, but we have protected our downstream industries from competition. So first, I think there's less of an argument for doing that. Second, we haven't really created a system by which we're picking winners based on either the country's economic complexity or the ideas that have been popularized by Ricardo Hausmann about what is the adjacent possible. So the adjacent possible means if you're producing spoons, then maybe the next industry you want to go into is forks or knives. And so in conversations with Ali Salman in the past, I've said, we produce cars, but we don't produce toys. We don't produce toasters or coffee machines. And when we produce toasters, we import the parts and assemble them here. What this does is it creates this, we've configured our economy. This is very important to realize. We've configured our economy to be import substituted. And we do that by consistently keeping the dollar depressed. And the champion of that, I'll stop it. But what that does is it creates a hardship for exporters, right? It creates a hardship for exporters. And so your economy can either be configured to be import substituting or export oriented. It's hard to, there's a trade-off there. When you decide to be import substituting, you're creating the opportunity for greater rent seeking. So a lot of that washes away if you err towards configuring your economy towards what the market is saying, either about the dollar or about what to invest in.
So I'd really like to get more questions so I'd request the next people who would be asking their questions to keep them short. I will take 3 questions first, and then we'll throw it to the panel, and that's how we're going to do it from now on. So in this cycle, if Abdullah Yusuf Saab, Khalil Rahman Saab, and Dr. Shujab, you could consecutively ask questions. Mike, can you please read it?
Thank you. I'm Abdullah Yusuf, ex-chairman FTR. I must first thank you all for this lovely day and the presentations, etc., that we've had. Very useful. Now, we all have this understanding now that the real issue is that we have this huge problem. On the one side, we have the fiscal deficits, and we have the trade deficit, and of course, then we keep on increasing our total debt. Now, if we are just going to carry on like this, it is not sustainable. You cannot do it. The question is that what is then the way forward? Now, we've already heard that, we have to go for increasing our tax base, and then we have to reduce our tax rate. I totally agree with that. The point is that when we talk of increasing our tax base, I feel, my view is that, what we have as a major issue is our cash economy, non-documented economy. You are not able to reach out to those potential taxpayers. So what is now a kind of a worldwide experimented system, that is systematization through automation. You have your CNIC number, that is your sole identifier. And then all third-party sources, you have that information coming to you through that electronic system. Once you have everything there, and then you are going to confront that person, how can he deny? So he has to come into the net. And that is something I feel that we have to really focus on. And this should be, I feel, one of the things going out from you to the government to actually try and convince them that they have to move in this direction so that substantial increase can be made in the revenue side. This is that one side, that is the revenue side. I think you mentioned that there is a 4 trillion at the moment, the revenues that are being collected. Yeah, 4 trillion, but that is not right because it is about 7 trillion right now. And now, when you mentioned that there was this,
I think we're talking about just direct. I think you're talking about if you combine
total revenue.
That's 7.
Yeah.
But the direct side is much.
Yeah, direct is obviously less, but then I thought you mentioned the total. So anyway, so that substantial increase in the total revenue has to be achieved, because otherwise, how will you be able to manage your fiscal deficit, which is really a major issue at the moment. The second side is your expenditure side. Now, even there, you have the potential to reduce that, and that is also inevitable. You have to do it. Just to give you a small example, the last, government, they had created an austerity committee, and I was also a member of that. Now, one of the recommendations that we made were that you have at the moment 42 ministries, and you should now bring them down to 21 ministries, 50% reduction. And this will give you so much of saving, and that you must do. Now, the proposal, when it went to the Prime Minister, he said, yes, it's, I think, a very good idea. But how am I going to deal with those 21 ministers who are going to be removed? So the political problem, basically. Now we have to all understand that it has to be in the national interest that you have to take decisions and you have to move forward because of whatever is the situation at the moment. So I would request you that you please also try and, advise the government also to come into this kind of a mode. Thank you.
I totally agree with you on the automation part. But taxes in general, it should be voluntary. Okay, I mean, you pay your taxes because you have to pay your taxes. Okay, that's simple. Now, Dr. Laffer has just written a recent book. It's called Taxes Have Consequences. And it's a 100-year study on taxation in the United States. And in America, in most developed countries, the 1% up to the 10%, they pay literally 80% of the total tax rate. Okay. Anybody below the 50%, they pay zero taxes. In fact, they get a check in their account. On the contrary. So the idea is to broaden the tax base, but the problem here with a lot of underdeveloped countries is the high income earners, they're not paying their fair share, of taxation. And the only way they don't pay their taxation is either because they're super powerful, they're rich, they can influence, they can corrupt, or simply just not pay. And these are the people that are actually need to pay their fair share, in my opinion, okay? And I know that their wealth is there and their true income is very much there, but their true income is never declared. So at the end of the day, automation and all that is very good, but the idea is that if you make a tax plan that is fair, that will get everybody to incentivize and then pay up. But don't forget at the same time that in Western economies like the European Union, if you pay 10 rupees to the government, you get at least 8 to 9 rupees in benefit back. But in developed countries, you pay 10 and then you get 2 to 3 rupees in return. So that is not really an incentive.
No, but there is no doubt about what you're saying. Actually, the tax has to be paid by whoever is getting the income. And when
True
you are
income,
saying,
true income.
yeah, when you are saying that he is avoiding and he is not paying, and that is precisely the point I'm trying to make, that when you will have an electronic system, it will bring out actual facts of whoever he is, how much income it is, how much tax he's supposed to pay, but he is not paying. And that is what you have to deal with as our issue.
Yeah, but at the end of the day, taxation is all about voluntary pay. I'm not saying that you're going to get everybody to pay. There are going to be loads of people that won't pay, but you will get a lot of people to come into your tax base. And the word that I don't like, that a lot of people talk about, is tax net. To me, it's very derogatory to talk about tax net.
No, but I think
it's like you're catching fish.
Voluntarily, nobody is going to come to you. You have to make sure that they come to you because of your system. That is the only way.
That is true, but if there's a fair share tax-based system,
No,
then
it has
there
to
will
be
be
a
amount
fair
of people
share.
that will come.
No, it has to be a fair share.
Let's continue this conversation over
There is
lunch.
no doubt about that.
And if you would allow me, I'd like to take some more questions. Dr. Khalil, if you could, and then after you, Dr. Shujan.
Yeah, very short and direct question. Dr. Ali Hassan, you are Finance Minister of Pakistan. Congratulations. But would be the first order you are going to issue to the FBI, order or advice or whatever it is. Thank you.
I am a trained economist with a doctorate in economics from a Canadian university. I'm saying this because what I'm going to say is it combines aspects not just from the economic world, but I'm also a bureaucrat. I don't like this word bureaucrat, but I've been a bureaucrat for about 25 years in the government of Pakistan. So I bring both these realms into my world of experience. Now I looked at I've never come across Rizwan Rawji, but I've heard about you from my friends, Dr. Sohail, who was posted in pension. I heard about you from him. I looked up your name yesterday on the internet, and I watched your video where you are you come across as a very authoritative and a firm person. making some kind of an argument about Belgium and the three regions of Belgium and how taxes were very high. I enjoyed listening to your talk and this issue, this thing that this trade about politics, good economics. I think you also made you made a plea regarding that in that talk of yours. No, I'm going to finish up. But then I also saw a letter written by you to the Financial Times recently, where you hailed Trustonomics as a solution to Britain's problems. I think I came across that yesterday. Now, UK, Anthony Fisher was he's the chicken breeder who created the IEA. I happened to be in England as a student in the early 70s, and I had come across some of these, the famous Keynes versus classics is something that I read when I was a student in London. Now the issue is that was the cradle of all the things that you've told us today. The cradle, post-79, Reagan, Thatcher, the revolution began in the UK. And, but somehow the revolution seems to have gone wrong lately, globally. People saying that, the era of neoliberalism is over. It was over in the 1930s, and once again, after having gone through 40 years of, good record in terms of growth and so on, globalization, the pendulum is swinging back now. Now, in terms of the backdrop, today's world, globalization on retreat, and the kind of movements, populist movements that we are seeing in the part of the world where you spend most of your time, is this the right kind of message to give in this backdrop, in this world when the pendulum is swinging? Two people in Pakistan that we should try an experiment which the politicians of UK no longer have the stomach for. So I want you to, I'm adding some complexity to the arguments that you're making. So how do you sell, these 6 pillars to the people of Pakistan when the rest of the world is moving away from, all these things? Very popular, a coherent doctrine. It was a very coherent doctrine for the time that it was there, and it also bore good results as well. But the world is somehow now, wisening up to the downsides of this doctrine. So, is this the right time, the right climate for selling this message to Pakistan?
I'm just going to take another question. Muhib sir, you have a question?
I think
all right. So first, economics and
I was rather disappointed, and so was Dr. Laffer, because I think Truss's program with the Chancellor of the Exchequer, Quasi, was the right one. But unfortunately, they just didn't do it the right way. Okay? I don't think they took a broader understanding as to what the cabinet itself would decide, that would this be the right appropriate moment to do it. So overall, the idea was not a bad idea. The idea is how it was executed, in my opinion. Okay, because it was a pro-growth agenda. It was a clear pro-growth agenda. However, the markets took it in a very negative way, and everything went down the drain, and they were removed from power immediately. But my question is not that their policies were incorrect. It's just that the way they presented their policies was incorrect. It was too fast and too much for the British public to take it in one go. That's my opinion. Now, selling the idea of supply side, I'm not just selling the idea of supply just to Pakistan. I would love to sell it to South Africa. I would love to sell it to the Congo, where I was born. Okay. The idea is that if you want economic growth, you can only get economic growth through incentivizing
the people, okay? And economic growth, as just John F. Kennedy said, it is 62. All boats rise when you have a rising tide, okay? We don't have a magic solution. We don't have this and that. All we say is that if you implement the 6 pillars, okay? And for me, the 6 pillars is like a 6-piston engine. They all have to work in the same proportion and same order. If one of the piston is not working well, it doesn't do such a good job on the engine overall. You're gonna get sputtering here, sputtering there. So each piston has to be correct and each piston has to be going in the right direction. And that is the whole idea of supply side economics. So I'm not just focused on Pakistan. I would love to do it for a country like South Africa. I would love to do it for the Congo, and I would love to do it for several other countries. But the reason I'm doing it in Pakistan is because I think this country is blessed with the most intelligent people, and especially the upcoming generation, which I'm seeing with my own eyes. And they are the ones that are going to be the future, and it's not fair on them, in my opinion.
So first, the gentleman here, I didn't catch your name, sir, said that the economic situation today is unsustainable. I fear that it is actually quite sustainable for the elite. If you look at the history of Pakistan, we have been in current account deficit for all but 3 or 4 years. And we've always managed to get loans to push the problem forward beyond our governments. Right? So every single dictator, democracy, from Ayub onwards, if you at least, though that's the data that I've looked at, everyone has run trade deficits. And so the system today works incredibly well for the elite of this country, whether that is elected or otherwise. The people who live in farmhouses. They live in farmhouses because the system is configured to give them benefits, even as the rest of the country declines. You talked about the non-documented economy and the CNICs, and I think that's incredibly important. So I think for the last 10 years or so, and there are people in this room who will be more knowledgeable than me on this issue, we've had this claim, this common sense claim by people for more than a decade now that we should plug NADRA and FBR together. And so NADRA has issued CNICs, every bank record is linked to CNIC, every car owned, every piece of property. Why hasn't it happened? Well, recently there was an effort and the FBR turned around and said, this is not practically possible. We can't tax these people either because they have exemptions or because when we looked at the data, it didn't make sense. And they gave an example, FBR gave an example, where they went to a car dealership and they said, there's a guy who owns 10 cars and his income is not enough to support it. It was a salesman on the floor of that showroom. So every person, whenever there was a car transaction, the practice was that the showroom janitor's name was, the CNIC of that person was put on the car registry. Well, to my mind, that's no reason to stop enforcing. We should ask him to pay his tax, but before we ask him to pay his tax, we should bring all of the cars and give him the keys. And then say, here's the amount of tax outstanding, right? We don't go far enough because there's no political appetite to do it. And so unless our class of people is very strange. We're not necessarily the exact beneficiary. We do benefit from some benefits that should not accrue to us. So for example, Mifta Ismail has spoken very passionately about the fuel subsidy and how he is getting a fuel subsidy for his Land Cruiser. We shouldn't have a fuel subsidy. We should not have an electricity subsidy. A quarter of our population doesn't have electricity connections, yet we give electricity subsidies and so on. But for the most part, we are not perhaps direct beneficiaries of those sort of exemptions. But we don't agitate politically. And so where I do disagree with you is on reducing expenditures. Pakistan's spending on the public sector is among the lowest in the world. I do agree with you on the suggestion of, I wouldn't call it austerity. I don't like the term austerity. I would say repurposing expenditures. So the 21 ministries or the 22 ministries that you were suggesting should be removed. I would want them to be removed because they're not efficient, but those resources should be deployed in, in other places. To just give you a sense, I know one number off the top of my head because I've done research on this. There is one public clinic for every 10 villages in Punjab. So it's not the case that we're underspending, or I'm sorry, that we're overspending in terms of government expenditures. It is that we are underspending, and that reflects because that makes sense because our tax to GDP ratio is so low. Ultimately, how much we spend on the government is linked to that. Our government is not large enough. To Dr. Khalil's question, it depends. My first order as finance minister will depend on how I come to power. If I come through status quo politics, my first order of business will be to create a tax exemption for economists. But if I come through a reformist party, then I do this. We have all the data. This country has all the data it needs, or near enough, all the data it needs to get our tax house in order, but we lack political will. So if that's fixed, then I'll get down to business. I'm sorry? Well, of course not. No politician has political will. I'm exaggerating, but what's that? Absolutely. That's what every politician does.
There's also, these days I'm studying the e-commerce market, and there's a lot of work that has been done on tax harmonization. This is a question that's for you guys. And the government of Pakistan recently, all the provinces are looking into the rules of supply, a place of supply rules, common rules to define what a good is, what is a good and what is a service. And through this research, it makes me wonder if the categorization between goods and services, because these are also, they become political issues. They are technical issues, but they become political issues. Whether the distinction between goods and services in this day and age, in this computerized digital economy, it's worth making that distinction. Anyway, that's the first question. Second question, young man at the back who raised their hand. Young man, please introduce yourself and your question. Keep it short, please. And Bharti Sawa after.
Assalamu alaikum. My name is Muhammad Rayyan Faisal, and I'm studying international relations from Delhi University, Islamabad. My question is for Sir Rizwan Rawji. Sir, you said that government has been the problem and it has to undoing things rather than doing. Sir, my question is, if I perceived your statement correctly, that could you please devise an institutional framework for that, because you just couldn't make government irrelevant from such area, because at the end it is accountable in front of public and international arena. And don't you think that privatizing this area could be a potential threat for security, economic security particularly, regarding individual or foreign agendas or something like that?
Are you talking about government or are you talking about government entities?
So government.
Government.
You said that government has been the problem. It has been.
The problem is whenever there's a crisis, the government always comes into the picture and actually increases the crisis by putting in measures that are just not pro-growth, okay? Listen, in the end of the day, let them take a long holiday, okay? That's my idea. जाकर अभी छुट्टी पे जाओ 30 दिन 40 दिन 60 दिन बेटा बीवी सबको ले जाओ मरी हिल्स में हमारी जान छोड़ो. The idea is that whenever there's a crisis, instead of undoing things, ये regulation निकालो ये regulation निकालो, let's get rid of that. No, we want to pile up more and more regulation. That's the detriment. That's the detriment. The idea is that they need to get out of implementing bad policies, and they need to remove bad policies that have been implemented currently and in the past. Basically, it's Adam Smith saying the free hand, okay? It's called letting the free hand, laissez-faire economics. Do not come, do not interfere, do not mingle, and let society grow. And that's what I'm trying to get at. When the government comes in the picture, everything becomes payajam, and we don't want any more payajam.
Just two quick things, concerning the laissez-faire economics, markets solving all problems. So perhaps we are talking about this because when the problems have happened due to Reaganomics and Thatcher, it's been a while and maybe people have forgotten. Because when that period was there, then there was talk about how trickle-down economics have failed. And recently there's been talk about rising inequality. That inequality has in fact, looking at the past 40 years or whatever, has risen between countries, and within countries it's inequality has worsened even more. So should we go back to, and then just one other thing about markets solving all problems. Markets basically they efficiently allocate capital, right? But you need to be a player to participate in that market. If you are, you don't have the money, or you don't have you're not part of that market, then you're not going to be in the picture for any solution or anything. So that's one thing. And then the other thing, Ali Hasanain, that you talking about how system can continue merrily as it has been doing. So it just brings me to our present situation, with the IMF program, and so we've had 23 of them. So I was recently having this discussion about. So here we are in another program. I mean, in the current program. And we don't want to talk about the the D word. There's a D word, and it's not divorce. It's another D word. But then in the early 2000s, we actually had restructuring. We had the Paris Club and the London Club restructuring, and I was talking to a friend recently, and just we were going back and forth about how did that happen? And it so happened that, we came to the conclusion that there was backing, there was more support for Pakistan at that particular time. And so that global support lined up, was all the ducks in a row, and had that done. But then the benefit we got from that, we kind of squandered that on consumer, on building up a consumer economy. So how can we actually do that again and then ensure that we don't squander the benefit? Because if we have to have a reset, why don't we have that reset and build the political support to make that reset happen?
One last question before we close the session, actually, and then Mehtab Sahab, could you please, do you have a mic? Can you please get the mic to Mehtab Sahab? Thank you.
Hello, this is Mehtab. I work for the news. So my question is, as the finance minister in his inaugural session has stated that the fiscal federalism is unsustainable, but there is a distortion. Why I'm saying there is a distortion? Because on one side, he's saying that it's unsustainable, and at a time when Pakistan is facing economic difficulties, and everyone is talking about austerity, there is one expenditures which is untouched, and that is the SDGs achievement program for the parliamentarians. On the eve of the budget, they invested 68 billion rupees. Now it's jacked up to 87 billion rupees. So what is the view of distinguished speakers that how much local government is important in Pakistan to ensure service delivery as well as to complete the fiscal federalism on account of administrative as well as on the fiscal front. Thank you very much.
You want me to start with that? All right. So I'll come back to Moin Saab's question, but fiscal federalism, I think he is correct that the current form of fiscal federalism is unsustainable. But the solution is not to roll back the 18th Amendment or to roll back fiscal federalism. It is to go even further. We stopped halfway, right? So what did we do? We said, okay, the federal government will give X amount of money to each province. There's a formula, and it's actually a very reasonable formula. NFC award system is quite reasonable. Under all of the equations of the NFC is a political or a judgment-based allocation. But that's fine. I have no issues with that. Where I have an issue is that A, provinces don't have any incentive to raise taxes. Provinces can overspend without responsibility. And as a result, what I tried to communicate in my presentation also was, we are not creating responsibility at the local government level or power, right? So local government, unfortunately, we really never, in the one, was it a couple of days or whatever, the Hamza Shehbaz government in the few months ago, the PMLN actually brought forward the Local Governments Act. Ahmed Iqbal was the sort of brains behind that, among others. And we did not we've not had that full devolution that we should have had. There's absolutely no, so it's not the case that you need to devolve just because the numbers are not adding up. That's part of the story. You have to let local governments raise taxes, but it's important because you have to create responsibility and energize them to work for the benefit of the tehsil, not just because they're reporting to the board. I don't know if that makes sense. The D word meant default. Sorry. Okay. So first, actually, the other question. So are markets a replacement? So what is the role of markets? I think markets are not a replacement for leadership. We have to have, a country has to have leadership, and there are important places where decisions have to be made that markets are not great at leading. One of the things is equity issues, and increasingly there's fantastic work out by economists on how automation will change the economy. Right, so the more automation is happening, increasingly jobs are being lost in advanced economies that were being done by people. In the past, when automation was happening, those people were getting absorbed into other industries. Now automation is happening so fast that in advanced countries, those people are not being absorbed. And so you have to have some sort of income support or social protection system that takes care of those people. That's a non-market allocation. Another place, and think about how you decided to pick the career you picked. Right? A lot of that has to do with agenda setting at the national level. Again, there's a role for leadership. So I don't buy the idea that all decisions have to be made by the market. Specifically about the Paris Club restructuring. Again, I said earlier, the present system works very well for the elite, and we don't hold them politically accountable. What Pervez Musharraf did, and Pervez Musharraf is held as some sort of economic, an era of economic prosperity, is that there was a lot of restructuring that happened because Pakistan was politically important in the world, geopolitically important. By the way, someone said economic security. I want to correct you. There is no term called economic security in economics. It was invented 2 years ago by the National Security Advisor. And then a lot of people have caught on this term. If you go and read economics literature internationally, economic security कोई चीज नहीं है, geoeconomics है. There are trade relations, there are agreements to exchange knowledge and so on. But I think economic security is a poor label to use. I've argued with Mohit constantly against that term. But coming back to this, we had a geopolitical, what is called a geopolitical rent. We got that money, and instead of restructuring the economy, the dollar was held at what was it, 55 or 60. The exports to GDP ratio of Pakistan fell from 16% to 13% during those wonderful Musharraf years. And we remained a consumer economy. In Dar Saab's earlier stint, in his third stint, where he earned the label of Daronomic or the term Daronomics, exports to GDP fell, I think, from 13% to 8% of GDP. Right? So until we're going to start, so I don't think default will fix Pakistan, by the way. If we default and the same political actors stay in power and we don't create political parties that are responsive to the broader public, we'll keep defaulting. And I think Latin America is testament to that.
I think these are maybe the last words officially from this forum. Basically, I will be addressing Moin Batra's point about inequality, and you have it. I think it's a real concern, and all of us, of course, are witness to that. But I ask you a counter question, and that is when we have, there is always a trade-off, and we also have preferences. So when we have two major problems like absolute poverty, number of people living below poverty line, not sufficient living standards, and we also have a inequality problem, what will be the first problem you would like to tackle? And I know they are related, but I would like to say that we would tackle the absolute poverty, the living standards question first, and we will talk about, again, talk about China model. One of the outcomes of China model was that we often hear that word, 800 million people lifted out of poverty. So, and in the process, obviously, there has been huge increase in inequality, particularly due to the CCP structure and how the political monopolies are there in China. So that's another story. And so that problem is there in China. But they're not going to stay there. I mean, I think their cause of celebration is that they have lifted one of a huge nation out of poverty, and that is something to be celebrated. But yes, there will be problems in inequality. So that is, I think, where we are coming from. Generally, primary to philosophy है, वो भी इस तरफ है कि हम growth की इसलिए बात कर रहे हैं, jobs creation की बात कर रहे हैं. We need to talk about large number of people, majority of people improving their living standards, and that is the kind of the ethos or the vision we have. But I do admit that there will be inequalities. The last point really is that I would not, honestly speaking, I would not care about inequality if the people who are earning wealth are earning it on their merit, entrepreneurship, their talent. Also, some of people are also inheritance. They are making fortunes. They have made fortunes. Saudis are one of them. So that is, I think, what is important is that how you create wealth. So you come state ki baat kar rahe hain, state access ki baat kar rahe hain. That is a problem. That is something we need to deal with. And that's why we are against the idea of subsidies, of exemptions, which create. I'll actually end here with Dr. Khalil Ahmed's word, an excellent word, Riyasat-e Ashrafiyya, the rise of aristocracy in Pakistan. So I think that is something we need to all worry about. That the kind of elite we have created is not a purely a commercial or a business elite; it's a status elite, and that is something I think all of us would agree have to be fought back, and have to be reduced. Thank you from all.
One last question.
So we have to.
Just one last. maybe from what we saw, if you.
नहीं, अभी no, lunch पे sir, lunch पे कर लेते हैं, sorry. Let's conclude, we will continue.
Is everybody hungry?
Yeah. So before we break for lunch, I need Ms. Lam, I need your presence on the stage. If you could just help us distribute some souvenirs amongst the speakers. I think to summarize, everybody has emphasized, at least on the speakers panel, that the size of the pie is extremely important, and not so much what is happening with the division of it. If there's no pie to divide, there's nothing to. So, Ms. Brigitte,
नहीं वो क्वेश्चन
come on to the stage.
कह रहे कि lunch का पूछना
A shield for Rizwan Rawji. Maybe. Raj Prasad, are you still there? And Ali, if you could present the souvenir to Ms. Lam. We also had a shield for Tariq Badha Saab, but as you can see, he did not, he was unable to come, he had a meeting. So, in the words of Salim Saab, level of seriousness. Let's break for lunch and to conclude, and thank you everybody for joining us today.